of our middle school workshop series. I'm going to announce George Scott in a moment, but Mr. Gizzo would normally be doing this, but he's our videographer for the evening. So about George Scott, licensed marriage and family therapist known throughout New Jersey as an energetic and engaging speaker. His expertise helped bring professional staff and parents to a greater understanding of their role in raising healthy children. George believes all adults have the power within them to improve the lives of children. Now, George is going to talk to our staff today during our faculty meeting. George is also going to, after he speaks to our parents, he's going to speak to our 8th graders tomorrow. He's really going to concentrate on self-care and the transition needs as they move on to high school. So let's give a round of applause to George Scott.
So let me begin by saying what I think needs to be said, and that is, my heart goes out to all of you in this community for this collective grieving that is important for the loss of Samantha. We're so connected anymore. Communities like Robbinsville are so connected. So I think it's important to go through the ritual of grieving, to be able to stand by your kids and answer questions if questions come up. Reach out to school counselors if that's what's necessary, to kind of get some guidance and advice. But it's really important for the community to do what it is in the process of doing in order to heal and come out the other side of this with a better appreciation for what we have while we have what we have. So I wanted to acknowledge that. I didn't want to begin without that. Probably I wouldn't be sharing what I'm sharing just 5 or 6 years ago. Just briefly, I did 35 years as a director of student services. That was kind of my public school work. Most of it here in Mercer County, some of it was done in Middlesex County. This is affected by my work as a marriage and family therapist. And about 6 years ago, in the spring of 2013, at the time I was a coordinator for the Traumatic Loss Coalition. And what that is, in New Jersey, every county has a TLC, and every county has a coordinator for the Traumatic Loss Coalition. And we have two purposes. Number one, we support districts in doing suicide awareness training, but we also respond to schools when there's been a tragedy of some kind, any kind. Whether it's a tragedy that involves a student or a tragedy that involves a staff member. In addition to that, if there's a youth group or a sports team that suffers a loss, with a call we can go and help the adults help the kids. So that's one of the roles I had. And on a Sunday evening, I got a call from Bernie Bragan. And Dr. Bragan, who is now at Monmouth University, at the time was the superintendent of a small community down in southern Monmouth. And he called me to say that they had suffered a loss that weekend. One of their 13-year-olds had taken his own life. And could I come down with some members of the response team and support them as they did some healing? Because whenever there's a tragedy within a youth family, there's usually an immense response of uncertainty. Our adolescents are not quite sure what to do with this. They feel all kinds of feelings, but they can't make it make sense. So the reason I tell you the story is because at the end of that day, now I live here in Mercer County, and I was working in Monmouth County. So I have about an hour's drive on 195 going west. And usually I'm debriefing in my own head, or there's music playing or talk radio playing, except for that day there wasn't. There was really a haunting question in my mind. And it was a haunting question that brought me to do this work and to kind of be here this evening to try to influence your thinking, because that's my goal. No secrets here. I'm trying to influence your thinking. Just in case anybody isn't quite sure. And if that bothers you and you'd like to leave now, that would be okay, because that's my goal. See, the question that got raised in my head that day was an unusual question in this fact. I kept asking myself, how is it possible that from his birth to just 13 years, one of our babies couldn't see the way of doing tomorrow? And isn't there a whole lot of other stuff in between that can happen to our kids? And isn't there something that we could do as loving, caring, thoughtful adults and parents and school folks to change that trajectory? Isn't there something we can do to minimize the hurt that a lot of our kids are feeling? So one of the stories here tonight, I just want you to know that this is also about your own emotional needs. I don't shy away from the fact of believing that not everybody in the room is emotionally healthy. Why would I assume that? Why would I assume that if it's a room full of teachers that they would be emotionally healthy? That would be assuming that I'd be presenting to cardiologists and none of them had heart disease. Of course cardiologists can have heart disease. And of course parents can be emotionally unhealthy. The downside of that is that there's shame in our culture about that. That's the downside. Not the fact that it happens, because it's a factor of being human, but it's a factor that we can't talk about. You know, the kind of the joke that we use is that all of you are more likely to go to work tomorrow and talk to somebody about your colonoscopy rather than your diagnosis of anxiety. That you, in fact, would be able to talk more comfortably about that than you would about the fact that maybe you've been suffering, literally suffering from depression for a while. Emotional learning of parents and staff. So let me begin with this story. So it's a story, if you would imagine this, it's about a small village that's on the side of a river, very fast flowing river, and the river serves a purpose of water and recreation and transportation. It's everything. It's the lifeblood of the village. And every morning, if you were to go out before dawn, there would be a fisherman on the banks of that river enjoying the morning, enjoying the serenity of the morning, and getting ready for his day. And then one morning, as the story goes, as he's there in the morning, there's a scream for help, and he looks up and there's a kid in the river. So he does what any of us would do. He just jumps in, he swims out as best as he can. He grabs that kid, brings that kid back to the banks of the river, saves a life, big celebration. And the story is told that over the next week or two, he's had to do that 2 or 3 times. He'll hear a scream, he jumps in, he swims out, he saves a kid. Until the morning comes when he's there and he hears a scream, but it's not one scream, it's 2 screams because there are 2 kids in the river. And he works really hard, but he can't bring them both to the bank. One of those children dies. There is no celebration. But there is a meeting of the council of elders of the village. Here's the question, what are we going to do? How are we going to save these kids? So just like any other group, they were sharing ideas. Well, maybe we can put more fishermen out. Maybe we train our fishermen better. Maybe we can put a canoe out in the middle of the river so that if they flow down the river, they can hold on to the canoe and we can save them that way. Lots of ideas. And then the chief of the council stands up. There's quiet in the room and he looks at everybody and says, "They are fine ideas, but I have a question." And the question is, why the hell are so many of our kids in the river? It's a question I ask you. Why the hell are so many of our kids in the river? I'm not asking you to raise your hand and say, "Yeah, that's my kid." I wouldn't ask you to do that, but I know you worry. I know you're looking at ideas of how in this culture, in this life of ours, we can raise our kids up to be healthy. Let me ask you a question. How many of you would like your kids to be happy? Yeah, that's what I thought. Would you be willing to drop that goal to number 2? And instead of happy being the number 1 goal, I want to put healthy as the number 1 goal. Because if your goal is to raise just a kid who's happy, that happiness is fleeting, comes and goes. But if they're healthy, it doesn't matter if it comes and goes because they're already there, grounded, making good decisions, inviting good things into their lives. So let's focus on healthy, raising healthy kids, not just happy kids. It's an interesting mantra, right? Interpretation drives intervention. How you see something influences what you do about it. And if you misinterpret and your intervention misses the mark, either there is no change or perhaps we make it worse. So what we want to do, and this is for you with your kids, this is for staff with your kids, is how do we improve our understanding and our interpretation of what we see? Like, for instance, what do you see? Because how you interpret it affects what you do with it. So some people will say, that's easy, I see the duck. There's his bill, there's his eye. Someone will say, whoa, whoa, it's the bunny rabbit. This is his ears, and this is his nose. So how you interpret what you see influences what you say, what you do. In this picture here, how about this? Is there an old woman or is there a young girl? So some people immediately say, you know what jumped out at me? Boy, I see the old woman. There's her puffy nose and her eye and her mouth. And some people say, you got it wrong. This is not her mouth. This is her necklace and her earring and her face is looking that way. Old woman or young girl. How you interpret what you see influences what you say and what you do. Interpretation drives intervention. And what we've been asking teachers to do is to slow down the conversation, to pay attention to how our kids are telling us what's going on. I ask you to do the same thing, and the reason I ask you that is because your life is that fast. You know, I say to staff all the time, do you realize that when you come to work every day, there is zero time for thinking? You're always acting, reacting, acting, reacting. That's the same way with parents. We know what your rituals are like, right? Your kids are involved in stuff, and you're working, and you have stuff going on, fast-paced. So we got to be really careful because we're not quite sure sometimes what we see. We're not quite sure there. We're not quite sure about this young man. Maybe even her, and certainly not him. Don't know. We're trying to take a look at our children and decide what's going on. You know, all of us, your kids and you, have at least two stories in your life. You have at least two, so let's talk about you because you're here tonight. One story is an outside story. It's a mask that you wear. It's how you want to present yourself to the world. It's how you are looking and seeing people here, and this is how you want to impress them. But you also have an inside story, a more intimate story, a more private story that may not be equal to the mask that you wear out here. If your inside story matches your mask, if this is a somewhat contented mask and a somewhat contented inside story, you're good. But if there's a disconnect, if there's kind of unhappiness in here or chaos in here, uncertainty in here, and you try to do this, that disconnect will wear you down. So what we know is we got to be careful in how we interpret it. So how do our kids tell us what they need? That's interesting, right? Well, sometimes they tell us with their words. Sometimes they will actually share with you. Not frequently, but sometimes. How was school? Okay. Did you do anything interesting? No. Sometimes that's all you get. They tell you with their words. And some of you, they'll have those kids that will tell you everything. And after a while, it's kind of like, okay, that's not really what I meant with that question, how was your day? Even that is with words, right? Even our kids, when they get angry, really make an effort to tell us what's going on with their words. I want to talk with you tonight about your kids and perhaps their increasing disrespect. I want to talk to you about you and your disrespect because it's all part of the same motivation of us being human beings. How do we get what our needs are? Sometimes they show us with their behavior. You can interpret that and it looks like fearful and scared. So sometimes you're trying to read your kid because they're not giving you a lot. Sometimes it looks like that, just overwhelmed with life. Sometimes in the midst of tragedy, words just won't come and we just hold on to one another. We just cry, we just wail. It's our way of expressing this deep hurt and this deep sadness. And sometimes the yelling is at our devices. Sometimes what we know is, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, sometimes what we know is that when our kids get inside the game, when they're in there playing this life or death game, their brain doesn't know that it's a game. They're on a fight-flight. They're going to win, they're going to overcome, and they're going to prevent themselves from being killed in this game, and the emotions will roll, just like that little guy. Interpretation drives intervention. But you know what I found coming back from that tragedy in Monmouth County is that sometimes we, as really smart adults, sometimes we don't understand. And the absence of understanding, sometimes there's suffering. And sometimes people die. I'll give you an example. There's two right here, right? The idea of ingesting lead and the idea of tobacco use. If we don't understand what lead can do to the human body, or we're not worried about our drinking water, like in Flint, Michigan, 6, 7, 8 years ago, that worried us. And now what we know is in Newark, New Jersey, we're worried about that. What we know is in some of our urban settings, some of our other communities, now the pipes are beginning to fragment, the solder's beginning to deposit lead in the water, and what we know is lead is dangerous to the body, both to the mind, the brain, and the organs in the body. Same way with tobacco use. We didn't know. I always tell the story to the faculty, when I first started my career, I could go into the faculty room and couldn't breathe. Everybody was in their own breaks, smoking. Back in the day, you've heard that phrase, right? Back in the day, you could go see your primary care physician and he would have a cigarette dangling out of his mouth while he's taking care of your health. Because you knew that tobacco smoke was dangerous to your health. We also know that inhaling asbestos and other toxic stressors begin to affect our bodies. Yours, mine, our kids. So, what's that about? What are these stressors? Is there anything we can do about them? Is that really true, George? It's temporary, right? I mean, there's stress everywhere. Anybody raise your hand if there's no stress in your life tonight? Anybody? Yeah. Everybody has stress in their lives. So I'm not talking about stress, because that's everywhere. I'm not even talking about bad stress, because that can accumulate and we get rid of it. I'm talking about toxic stress that is held in your head and in your body and affects your well-being and the well-being of your children. And sometimes toxic stress looks like that. Sometimes, not even thinking about it, when we're having our issues as adults, sometimes we create such toxicity in our home environment. Take a look at the face of that little girl. You can see that. Or sometimes it might even look like that, where there's just this emotional dysregulation and can't manage self. Or this little one, or it just shuts us down, right? This accumulation of events that I believe you and I have responsibility for in our homes, and if you're a part of the staff in our classroom, that sometimes these are adults, young adult kids, to be unsure of what's going on. How do I get out of this? Right now my life sucks. That's how it feels. And for some people, the stressors begin really early in life. Like I wanted to put a little bubble over top of that baby saying, can I go back to where I came from? It's too hard out here. Toxic stress. So, well, hold on a second, because I'm way ahead of you guys. You know, I've got some information that I think you need. You know, the brain is so amazing that it, in fact, has a stress system that helps us survive. It's a stress response system that keeps us alive. So, let me begin by telling you a story about a bear. No, not that bear. That bear. Let me tell you a story about that bear. And the way the story goes is like this. Let's imagine, let's pretend that each of you, alone, by yourself, we're going for a walk in the woods. A beautiful spring day, kind of like Saturday. You said, you know, I got to get away. I just need to clear my head. I'm going to go out into the woods. I'm going to go take a walk. Now, I believe this is a fantasy story. And the reason I say that is because in my story, you don't have your cell phone with you. That's what makes it a fantasy. So, just you and nature. You go for a walk in the woods, and at the end of the trail, you see that guy. automatically, without even thinking about it, your stress response system, your survival system kicks in, right? Your heart rate starts pumping. Your blood pressure is up. You've got lots of blood going to the big muscles here because you may want to run, or to the muscles up here because you may want to fight. Respiration is up. You're gulping a lot of air. You want oxygen in your head. Your pupils, in that situation, your pupils dilate so you can keep an eye on the danger. And then you begin to scan for an exit. All of that happens within seconds of seeing the bear. Thank goodness. If this didn't happen 150,000, 200,000, a million years ago, the saber-toothed tiger would have eaten your ancestors and my ancestors. Then there would not be us here tonight. Deep inside the brain is stress response system that keeps us alive. Now, let's imagine that that bear keeps on walking. Doesn't smell you, doesn't see you. You know what happens within seconds? That system recalibrates. You take a deep breath. Heart rate is down, blood pressure is down, pupils expand. Because you haven't moved and burned it up, your hand shakes a little bit from the fear, because that's a cortisol response, but your body begins to go back to its normal state, all within seconds. That's not even this part of the brain. See, this is the part of the brain that does all the problem solving. You don't want to use this part of the brain when you see a bear. You want your automatic stress response system to take over. That's if you come across a bear in the woods. But what if the bear lives in the house? What then? Or if the bear looks like this, what then? Well, the same system takes over. Respiration's up, heart rate's up. But because the bear is always there, the system never shuts off. That little one there may be 3. She has an incredible survival system. Look what she did. She heard the bear roar and she ran. The first thing you want to do is get away from the danger. And then what she did is she found a corner to sit in, to put her back up against the wall so the danger couldn't come from behind her. And then she made herself as small as she could because maybe the bear won't find me. She covered her ears because she didn't want to hear it. She covered her eyes, she closed her eyes, she didn't want to see it. All for survival from the bear in the house. So I ask you, what if you're the bear? What if there are bears in the life of your child? Someplace else they visit? I ask teachers, perhaps they're the bear in the classroom. Where some of our children, because of behavior like this in the home, their system is always on. And that's where things happen, which is not what you want them to happen. So let's see where this is going. Remember this? Well, sometimes that stress response kicks in even earlier. What we know is that if any one of those moms lives in a very highly stressful situation like domestic violence, then what we know is, because her system is always on, what we know is this baby here, this developing fetus, gets fed the cortisol and adrenaline that she keeps. What we know, and we've learned this 30 or 40 years ago, right? What we know is if there's a pregnant mom and she drinks alcohol, it affects the baby. It's the same thing with toxic stress. It affects the baby. These are babies that when they're born, they don't soothe easily. And it's really important for you and me and our children that we get out of this frenetic life sometimes and get soothed and calm and relaxed. But these babies don't. That mom will put that baby up here and try to nestle that baby, and the baby doesn't calm, doesn't soothe. May not take the breast, may not take the bottle well. When that mom tries to lay that baby down in the crib, that baby just doesn't go off to sleep. Irritable. You can see them moving and whining and crying. And now we've got a situation between mom and the baby where mom is not getting rewarded for nurturing this baby, and the baby can't get settled, and it's off to a bad start in that relationship. That's why we worry about moms who have postpartum. after the birth of a baby, right? Because they can't rally what they need to do to nurture that new infant. What we know is that if that baby does feed, it doesn't feed easily, and there's a lot of times projectile vomiting. Because what we know is that when the human being is filled with a lot of toxic stress, the belly is affected a lot. Toxic stress. What are these events? Here they are. These are events that kids can have in their homes. Probably none of these in any of the homes in Robbinsville. Probably somewhere else. We know that's not true because we know that geography, money, your zip code doesn't protect kids anymore from some of the things that can happen in families. So, this kid's birth, his death, 13. What is all that stuff in between? And now perhaps what we begin to see is some of the worries that you have about your children, or about the friends of your children, or about the kid next door you're worried about, or an older child or a younger child. So what are some of these things? Like, what about this drinking and drugging to numb the pain? What about that? Because we don't like to feel uncomfortable. That's terrible for us. We will do anything we can to feel more relaxed on our bodies, even if that means numbing our bodies so we don't feel it. I ask this question of teachers all the time. I'll ask it of you. Probably won't see anybody here after tonight, so you don't want to run me out of the school, but I'm okay with that. I can run fast. If you find that yourself or somebody that you love, some adult in your family, somebody who is in the presence of your children, is drinking more or smoking more weed than you think is appropriate, but you have to ask yourself, how come? Not just to be judgmental that it's bad behavior. What's going on? That somebody needs to be higher than they naturally would be, or number than they naturally would be. What about those kids? What about these kids? What about kids who cut themselves and burn themselves and bang their head? What about those children? Crazy children? No, I don't believe that at all. See, my premise here is the large majority of babies that are born completely intact and wonderful. Yes, there are developmental disabilities, and yes, there are birth trauma. I have no question about that. But the large majority of kids, their systems are okay. Their learning systems are okay. This means I'm in great pain. These kids will tell you that they'd rather see the blood because the blood and the pain tells them that they're alive. They'd rather feel the physical pain rather than the emotional pain. And that's really what we're talking about, isn't it? The emotional pain. What can go wrong? How does it get off track where some of our babies begin to not know how to deal with their stressors? If you have boys, our boys don't usually do that. Our boys usually punch walls. So if you get kids who are home or you know of somebody that gets really angry with a video game or gets really overwhelmed by life and they punch a wall, that does the same thing. It calms them down. It creates pain, releases endorphins, temporary relief. What about these kids? What about these kids who fail in spite of immense potential? Why is that? Teachers will say, this kid is really capable, but look at the performance. Why is that? The reason I like this picture is, yes, because of the issue of failing it with immense potential, but I also like the halo of words around that young boy's head. Because what I need to tell you, and I tell teachers all the time, that young boy did not write those words there to describe himself. Those words were given to him, usually by some adult in his life. Several years ago, I had a mom and a dad come with their 15-year-old son. I'll call him Bobby. And Mom was really panicking, and Dad was really concerned because Bobby had started to fall apart. He used to be involved in a lot of stuff as a kid, and now he wasn't involved in much of anything. His grades had fallen apart, and now they found marijuana in his room. What are we going to do? Oh my God, what's going on with Bobby? So they came in and had Mom and Dad and Bobby sit in the room. We just started to kind of develop that family story, and we got to a point where I felt that I needed to hear a little bit more from Bobby, and he probably was reluctant to do that in front of Mom and Dad. So I said to Mom and Dad, hey, listen, would you guys mind waiting in the waiting room so I could spend some time with Bobby? They didn't mind at all. They were out that door. because it's uncomfortable sitting in a therapist's office, talking about what's going on. So I turned to Bobby and I said, hey, listen, Bobby, do you have a theory about yourself? He wasn't quite sure what I meant. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, Mom and Dad said this was the Bobby that they used to have, and now this is the Bobby that they have. What's your theory on what happened? He had tears in his eyes. Finally, he turned to me and said, well, he said, I guess it's just that I'm lazy. I said, well, lazy? Did you look that up for yourself? Were you looking for a word to describe yourself and you went to the dictionary to find that word to describe you? More tears. He said, no, when things don't go well with me at school, my dad tells me I'm fucking lazy. Put that right up there. Bobby will hold on to that word for a very long time. When Bobby grows up to be adult without some good intervention and help from Mom and Dad, Bobby will use that negative narrative to describe himself as never being good enough, never doing well enough, never satisfying people enough. Lazy, stupid dad. What about our kids failing in spite of their immense potential? What about unable to regulate emotion? These are kids in middle school or high school particularly. They're anticipating getting an A, and they get an A minus and they fall apart because they can't manage it. They break down, they cry, they just shut down. They don't want to talk about it. So why is it that that young boy or young girl didn't say, wow, an A minus, not bad, but I'm going to do better next time? Why not resilient and being able to bounce back? How come more and more of our kids aren't able to regulate emotion? Isolate. Avoid, shut down, inflicting harm on other people. You can see the escalation of behaviors. Being disrespectful, pushing and shoving. When I came back from Monmouth County, I started looking for some research that would support and take me in a direction. And one of the people I found was a Sandra Bloom. Dr. Bloom is out of Drexel in Philadelphia. And she began at inpatient, and she moved her model to schools. And one of the things she says is this: hurt people hurt people. That when you begin to see that behavior of kids hurting other kids, we need to know that there's something behind that boy driving that. That's taunting and teasing, that's bullying, that's school shooting. Hurt people hurt people. How do our babies get there? How's that happen? Sometimes our kids get so unhappy that they think about dying. It's more than just temporary relief from banging their heads or burning or cutting themselves. They really can't see themselves living this way anymore. What about those kids? And in New Jersey, kids as young as 10-year-old dying by suicide. How does that happen? That's this trail here. If that's not your worry, good for you. And you're doing a really nice job with your babies. But if you're worried about somebody, maybe there's a way that we can change the trajectory of their lives in order that they are more healthy. And then they can find happiness. So, in the absence of understanding, right, human beings suffer. We don't know what's going on. There's suffering going on. We don't understand it. Don't ask the right questions. If we interpret it incorrectly, people suffer and sometimes die. I was looking for reasons. I was looking for science, not just hypothetical. I wanted to know why some kids were suffering so much. And I came across this study from back in the late 90s called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. Here's the premise. There were two researchers. They wondered whether or not toxic environments, like in a family, could result in obesity. Would the human body pack on weight because they lived in a toxic environment? So they began to do interviews, and they had a series of questions. 17,000 people they interviewed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow you to interview yourself and get your own ACE score. So they're going to come 10 questions up here. 10 questions. If it applies to you from your birth to 18, you get a 1. If it doesn't apply to you, you get a 0. 10 questions. Here's the first one. While you were growing up, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, perhaps insult you, put you down, humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Did you grow up in a nest in which there was chronic humiliation, destructive for children of all ages, little ones, middle school ones, high school ones? People do not like to be humiliated. Let me test out my theory. Anybody here would like me to humiliate them in front of the audience? Just show me your hand and I've got some good zingers I can throw your way. Who would do that? Nobody likes to be insulted or humiliated. But what we find is sometimes out of our frustration or out of our anger, we say things that are humiliating to our children. Sometimes out of frustration, teachers say things that humiliate kids in front of the class. And until it's brought to their attention, wasn't aware that it was happening. For instance, you gotta be kidding me. Homework? No homework? Again? Could be really insulting and humiliating to a kid. The phrases that come up in our culture like, really? Really? Insulting. Comments like, yeah, whatever. Dismissive. And we do that so easily, but some of our babies are so vulnerable to that. It sticks on them just as if they were Velcro. We need to be really careful because this, of all 10 of the questions, this one has more responses than any of them. Here's question number 2. Did a parent or other adult in your household often or very often push you, grab you, slap you, throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Did it go from verbal to physical as part of your nest in your own growing up experience? If that was you, you get a 1. Number 3. Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch you, fondle you, have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt to actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? If that was your growing up experience, even if it was experience, you get a 1. Number 4, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you? You grew up thinking that you were not important. They didn't think you were special. Or your family didn't look out for each other, didn't feel close to each other, didn't support each other. Was that your nest as a kid, birth to 18? Now there is a tendency, by the way, if that's our nest, birth to 18 as adults, that we recreate that nest with our children. There's a tendency to do that. But let's see. Number 5, did you often, perhaps very often, feel that you didn't have enough to eat? Maybe you had to wear dirty clothes. Or you had nobody, no adult protecting you. Or maybe your own parents were too drunk or too high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it. The first 5 of these are things that you may have experienced yourself as a kid. The next 5 are things that you bear witness to. They happened in the nest, you were there to observe it. Number 6, or your parents ever separated or divorced. Now that can be a tough one for people because we do know this, and I know this as a marriage counselor, that 52-53% of first-time marriages end in divorce. Here's my fear. My fear that all of us, including teachers, normalize that fact and it doesn't bother us that a kid's mom and dad are separating or divorcing. And maybe it's important that it happen. Maybe it's a real toxic environment, maybe it's a bad environment, maybe that kid can only survive if that mom and dad are in separate places. I'm going to give you that. But not usually. But for some of our kids, the idea of losing a primary caregiver is devastating to them. Remember that stress response system with the bear? You come from a house like that where there's been this chronic chaos going on, even if there's a divorce, our kids pay a price for that. Number 7, was your mom, maybe your grandma, your stepmom, the maternal figure in your home, did you observe her being pushed, grabbed, slapped? Maybe something was thrown at her, maybe she was hit with a fist, hit with something hard, threatened. Did you watch her be threatened verbally or hurt physically? If you bear witness to that, you get another 1 on the ACEs score. Number 8, did you live with anybody who was a problem drinker, not a drinker, a problem drinker? Perhaps they were an alcoholic, or perhaps they used street drugs. Perhaps that was present in your nest growing up. It's a 1. 9. Was a household member depressed? Was there a mental illness in the family? perhaps a household member attempted suicide or died by suicide. Did kids grow up with that kind of tension and toxicity in the house? And then number 10, did somebody in the household go to prison? There are the initial 10. So your score is either 0 all the way up to 10. Now, what we found out in the look of the 17,000 people was that the higher the number, the more emotional and or physical outcomes, negative outcomes there were. That in fact it affects your well-being as a human. The tipping point is 4. People had a 0, 1, 2, or 3. There's kind of a mild effect on them, but 4 or more, and we worry about this with kids at school. Remember, I was looking at those kids failing in spite of immense potential, and kids who are really arguing or fighting or disrespectful. 4 is the tipping point. So let's see what it means to have a score of 4 or more. So if you've got an ACE score of 4 or more, there is likely to be poor academic performance. Why is that? Well, the reason for that is because if a kid lives with that in the nest, the brain begins to change the way it's structured. And they're not able to access things like memory, concentration, recall. They can't assimilate thinking. They don't problem solve very well. This wonderful part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex gets compromised. You know, there's something interesting about this part of our brain, that if I took any one of you, if you volunteered and said, hey, pick me, and we put you inside of a brain imaging machine, because now you can do MRIs of the brain that are in the moment, right? And we slide you in the tube, and we talk very nicely to you. We engage in conversation, we say nice things, perhaps there's nice music, and we look at your brain under the machine. This part of your brain is all lit up, like a light bulb. What it means is it's functioning. There's a lot of blood flowing there because it wants to work. It loves it because it's relaxed. But then if we change the narrative and start criticizing you through your earbuds, this goes dark. It stops functioning. Because kids under high stress, they can't access this. Adults under high stress can't access this. It goes dark, goes offline. It's like you trying to access software that's no longer accessible to you in your computer. And the more stressed our kids are, the less connected they are here. And therefore, although they're smart, and they knew it yesterday, when they're anxious about taking the test today, they can't perform. Amazing. Poor academic performance. Disruptive classroom behavior, disrespect. That can be home behavior as well. Disrespectful, defying authority, breaking the rules. Rules don't apply to me. I'm going to do what I want to do. And sometimes we see that as our kids get older, as our adolescents get a little bit older, they start pushing the envelope on house rules. I don't have to listen to you. We also know that when an ACE score of 4 or more, there's an increased need for discipline, both at home and in school. Now, some of you want to interpret discipline as punishment. I don't do that. You may want to. See, I see discipline as a way of developing a relationship which a kid learns from that bad behavior, unacceptable behavior. There's other ways of doing that, and we use it as teaching moments. It's interesting, you know, the word discipline comes from, I believe it was the Greek, of the word meaning to make a disciple of, discipline. To be a model so that the kid learns other ways to do things. Sometimes you have more and more disrespect for the adults. There's also, interestingly enough, more video game use. How's that? What's that have to do with it? That makes no sense whatsoever. If you're not doing well at school, you don't feel very competent. But if you do this game enough times and you get to number 10, you feel really competent. That's addictive. That feels great. I'm in control here. So what we see is kids will gravitate toward where there is competency for themselves, because nobody likes to be put down, humiliated, judged for not doing well. Nobody likes that. So one of the things we talk about with teachers is how do you create situations in which kids can express their competency in school, away from the video game. That's an outcome of kids who do not feel normally very competent. Then there's this. This is long-term stuff. This is not the immediate stuff. Think about yourselves in this one. Remember, you have an ACE score too. Because what it says is, if you've got an ACE score of 4 or more, in that child's lifetime, in your lifetime, you're twice as likely to develop cancer. Score of 4 or more. Twice as likely to develop cancer. Why is that? Because remember the bear? And remember the stress response system that never turns off? When you marinate your organs in cortisol and adrenaline for a lifetime, things begin to fail or cancer develops. Interesting piece of data. If you've got a score of 4 or more, your chances of developing heart disease increase 200% over somebody with a score of 0. Stress. Toxic stress in your body for your whole life. Well, thanks for this uplifting presentation. That's my Monday night TV shows. You haven't nobody left yet. So you be thinking about leaving. An increased likelihood of developing pulmonary illness. A lot of asthmatic kids with a high ACE score. Stressors here in the lungs. Immune system illnesses. The body stays inflamed all the time with this high ACE score if there's a bear in the house. Rheumatoid arthritis. Immune deficiencies like lupus and MS. Higher increase, higher risk. Increased struggle with personal work-related relationships. They don't do jobs well, these kids. They either quit or get fired. They can't do relationships well with the boss. Can't get there on time. They want to wear their hat. The boss says you can't. They want to be argumentative. Not able to accommodate the rules that you set at home or that the boss necessarily sets at work. Your risk of depression goes up 46 times. That of somebody with 0. I don't know whether you're concerned about any of that with your own kid. Schools are. Talk to your counselors. They'll not name names, but they can tell you there can be an increase. There usually is an increase. We're seeing more and more of an increase of kids being sent out for assessments as adolescents, including at the high school, because of fear of depression and how it might affect their desire or lack of desire to live. And the kid's risk of suicide goes up 1,200%. That takes me back to that boy in Monmouth County. I found that piece of data. I saw that. I said, is it possible? Can we do something as caring adults? Can I influence your thinking with your own babies in your own nest? Can it be done differently? Can we reduce the toxicity of what goes on? I believe so. I believe we can. Here are other ACEs factors. Since the late 90s, these are also things that contribute significantly to kids' well-being. Certainly the death of a loved one inside the family. Now, here's what's interesting. I think I mentioned Sandra Bloom earlier where she said hurt people hurt people. She also said this. She said, you know, it's not the event in a kid's life that does all the damage. It's the absence of a caring adult to be with the child while they live through it. Crap happens, right? Bad stuff happens. But if a kid feels in it alone, that's the damage. Can't figure, can't solve problems. Their young brains, even those really smart high school kids, their young brains are not really good in the midst of chaos of problem solving. But if they've got an adult, somebody that puts his hand around that kid's shoulders and says, hey, we're going to get through this, you're going to be okay, this is going to be all right, it mitigates the effects of the bad events. Presence in the life of the kid. Here's some typical stress response. You'll see this in your child. Teachers see this quite frequently. If this child gets referred to the nurse, and the nurse refers this kid to you, and you take this kid to the pediatrician, what do you think the outcome is going to be? Probably a diagnosis of ADD, ADHD. That's what it looks like, right? We're all aware of that. There's nothing wrong with the diagnosis. I'm not big on diagnoses. That's not how I like to do business. I like to work with people and behaviors. But I know this, that most kids who are diagnosed ADD or ADHD, what's the intervention? Medication. I'm going to write them a script for medication. What I'm suggesting is, might there be some other things that are creating those behaviors? Well, let me give you another example. The human body holds its toxic stressors in 3 places. Check yourself out, check your kids out. Ask your school nurse, any school nurses here? Ask your school nurse, what's 2 of the reasons frequent flyers go to the office? From kindergarten through 12th grade, common reasons why kids want to go to the nurse. Is number 1, because they got a headache. Amazing, that's where we hold our stressors, right back here, back shoulder. There your pop the Tylenol people, you out there. You migraine people, check out your own accumulation of stress in your life. Then there's another place, right in the gut. These are kids with belly aches and diarrhea and constipation. Hey, this has got to be a national problem. You know how I know that? I watch TV. Look at the commercials on TV. They're all for gut medications. Like y'all know what Linzess is, and you know more about irritable bowel syndrome than you want to know. Pepto-Bismol and Tums. Because the belly and the gut are crunched with the stressor. And a lot of our kids have those symptoms of that. Those moms that take their kid then to the pediatrician or they go to an internist and they get the test done, the doctor frequently says this, can't find anything wrong. Because structurally there's nothing wrong. What we got here is this body holding on to the stressors from this nest, from school, unable to discharge it and get rid of it. Pretty amazing. Neck. Gut. And the one I just told you a little bit about, right here in the chest, this is your pulmonary and your heart disease. Increased 200% because this is where we hold it. You just feel it. So what we know is our culture, your family, the way you do business creates circumstances where the body, unless it discharges its toxic energy, is going to hold on to it, and it's going to make us either emotionally or physically ill. Children who have been traumatized or live chaotic circumstances, they need to be in environments that are safe, emotionally safe, i.e. no bear. If they are in a safe environment and they feel good that the adults got their back, their bodies relax, they do much better. In fact, even their prefrontal cortex lights up more often. Amazing. It's in response to the environments in which they live. So the question is, how about your home? Is there a bear living there? Does it create this toxic energy that your kids are absorbing? Are they irritable? You find out there are some both emotional but also physical problems. How about school? How about the classroom? How about in your presence? Are you a bear with children? Do you represent that threat where their survival system is always on because they can't predict what you're going to say or what you're going to do? So here's the prerequisites for well-being. So what, George? So what, so what, so what? These 3 things are necessary in order to offset the accumulation of stress. Number 1 above all, sleep. Let's stay with that for a second. How's your sleep? Many of you disrupted, not enough hours, can't get there. Or you get there and you wake up but you don't feel rested. How about your adolescents? Or maybe even your elementary kids? Are they on their devices at night? Is their sleep disrupted? Are they going to bed at 1 or 2 in the morning and getting up at 6 or 6:30 and trying to do the school thing? Because their brains are not going to do the school thing. Sleep is the number 1. Nutrition. What you fuel it with. Chips and a Coke is not breakfast, or lunch, or dinner. In fact, many of you can't get your kids to the table anymore to have dinner as a family. When you can do that, it's healthier for kids. At least 1 night a week, you can do it more often, more frequently, it's better. Down at the table, having conversation, even though they say, this is stupid, I want to go to my room, the basketball game is on, I got homework to do, blah, 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 blah. Sitting together at a table and having dinner brings the family back together again. The research shows us they're healthier kids. Some families, I was talking to a teacher today, more and more frequently, some families are saying 1 night a week we're doing board games, no electronics, everybody puts their electronics away. That means you too. Some kids will tell you that you don't pay enough attention to them because you're already on your phone. Too much. One morning I had an early morning meeting in Monmouth County, and I got finished about 9:30, and I don't usually do this, but I stopped at a diner for some breakfast. Had a book with me. I was good to go. In walks a dad and his 13, 14-year-old daughter. Number one, all the TVs were on, so that was a major distraction. She had earbuds in, he had earbuds in. He was on his phone, she was on her phone. She got off her phone, took her earbuds out, and she sat and waited. He never disconnected from his devices for the whole time I was there. And I bet you this. I bet you he left the diner thinking, had breakfast with my daughter. He had breakfast with his devices, but not with his daughter. Here's what we know about devices now in sleep. A blue light from your phone, from your iPad, from your computer. A blue light will prevent the production of serotonin in your brain. The brain just won't secrete it. As a result of that, you can't get sleepy. I tell my kids that come into the practice, because the research says this, you have to be off the device at least an hour, sometimes 90 minutes, before you get into a sleep mode, sleep stage. Now, here's what some parents do. I'm sure none of you. It's all those other parents who didn't show up. I wonder whether or not you have any sleep hygiene rules in your family. And if you do, whether or not your kids abide by them. Like, have you said, listen, this is the schedule, and everybody's devices are going to be turned off, plugged in, and recharged at 10 o'clock. Some of you are afraid to do that because you're afraid of your children. Don't forget, all of you raise your hand, you just want your kid to be happy. That will not make them happy. But unless we set the framework, see, kids need structure, predictability, and affirmation. They need it. Nests and environments that are predictable. We know what's going to happen here. It keeps us safer. To be able to set that as an expectation is critically important. Will they fuss? Of course they'll fuss if there are no expectations right now. But consistently for a day, a week, maybe 2 weeks, you will have reorder in your nest. Exercise. Movement. Doesn't need to be a gym membership. You don't need fancy sneakers. You don't need cool clothes. That's not a prerequisite for your kid to start doing exercise. You don't have to spend your money on Nikes or New Balance or anything. What they need to do, what we all need to do, is to move our bodies, because when we do, it gets rid of the stressors in our bodies. Stuff that's held in the joints and muscles. You know, high-stress people, chronic stress people, many, many times wind up with the diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. It's an inflammation of the body, the autoimmune system, and it affects the muscles and the joints. But if we can learn to move our bodies and get rid of it and discharge it, our bodies are healthier. Our moods get lifted. Sleep, nutrition, exercise. I tell the story only because I like it. You may not like it, but because I have the microphone, I'm going to tell you the story. So, sometimes when there's a crisis at a school, the administration invites in service dogs, right? So, if you were to look at a classroom, doesn't matter, middle school, elementary school, high school, when there's a tragedy that morning, people's heads are down, they're crying, you can just see it on their faces until the door opens up and in walks a handler with a service dog. All of a sudden the mood shifts. Now what do the kids want to do? They all want to touch the dog. So they got to keep the kids in their seats. And then what the handler does is takes the dog and gently, slowly walks it up and down the aisles. And what you'll find is all the kids want to pet the dog. You'll also notice that when that handler finishes that room, the kids' whole demeanor is different. They've gone from this to this. Why? It's just a dog. Now, the really neat part about this is, if you were to go out in the hallway and watch the handler take the dog to the next classroom, you will see about midway, that dog would stop and shake itself. That's how we know it's discharging all the negative energy it just pulled out of the children. I can tell you don't believe that. that if you go and watch a National Geographic a video about the big cats, when they are on the prowl to eat, the hairs back up on their neck, they are focused, their heart rate is up, and they are ready to pounce to eat. When they calm down again, one of the first things they do is to go and shake themselves, because it's a way of discharging and get rid of that high toxic energy. I am not suggesting you make your kids shake themselves every night before going to bed. That's not my point here. My point is that there are ways for us to discharge the negative energy that is affecting the prefrontal cortex, that is affecting your kids' emotional behavior and school performance. It's all connected. Healthy additions to traditional well-being. I say this to the end because I knew if I used this first, you guys would just plain walk out. So anybody who do yoga? Awesome, good for all of you. Because yoga, or any Tai Chi, martial arts, meditation, are ways in which we now know, because we can measure it, that the body calms itself and recalibrates itself and heals itself. That meditation has demonstrated that meditation decreases cortisol. Remember the handshake? Like this? That's a cortisol level. And if there's a bear in the house, you have a kid who's really anxious all the time. If there's a worry in the house because somebody's ill, financial problems, see, it's not just that the bear is a person, it can be a circumstance. Somebody can have a terminal illness in the family. There could be a recent loss of a grandparent who died. There could be a foreclosure on the house. All those things affect our kids. And what we know is, and I'll tell you the school piece of this is, practicing decreases cortisol, enhances healthy sleep, improves immune function, decreases overall inflammation. Many schools, preschool through high school, are beginning the day now with some deep breathing and some calming, and they're finding kids' performance is even better. That we know there's a direct relationship between calming and soothing the body and kids' performance because it lights up the prefrontal cortex. Meditation helps to mitigate the effects of toxic stress. It helps to shut it down. It helps to speed it up. Your toolkit. This is your walkaway, right? By the way, the district has the PowerPoint. It's going to post it on the website. It's being videotaped. You could watch it again, vote for me for an Emmy Award, in fact, if it comes up, or not. But you can take a look at this information, because here's your toolkit. Here are the things that we need for wellness. It's number one, you've got to have sleep. And you've got to institute rules in your house for sleep time. And I'll even suggest this, and Kathy's in the room, and don't want to alienate the superintendent, or the principal, for God's sakes, or the guidance counselor from the high school, all these big monkey people. But I'm going to suggest this. If you structure your afternoon, evening such that they're in bed by their 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, kids need 8 hours minimum, 8 minimum. You'll see an increase in performance. Here's what's going against the grain. If the kid says, I still got homework, you can say to them, you know, the guy the other night says, you don't have to finish your homework. I'd rather you get to sleep. I'll send a note in with you that said, that George Scott guy said, my kid didn't have to finish his homework because he needed to get to sleep. And I'll tell you what would happen if you truly did that. Given that a little bit of time, that kid's system would reorient itself to the point where he or she would do all of their homework because they're better, clearer thinking and time management. It really does work. What's the second one? That's the nutrition. Do that family meal. Take care of your own nutrition. Smoothies are okay, power bars are okay, but good nutrition. Now there's something, those of you that went to grad school or even your undergraduate work know about Maslow's hierarchy, right? Maslow said that you can't get to the top of this really being smart unless your nutrition is great. And your safety, emotional safety is guaranteed. And you're connected and attached, just like that baby needs to be attached to that mom. It all fits, folks. It all comes together. Exercise is it. That's the third. Healthy relationships and mental health awareness. Healthy relationships. Prerequisite to well-being. Mental health simply means you pay attention to it. No, it's not okay that your kid is disrespectful. That does not have to be a part of adolescence. No, moodiness does not necessarily a part of adolescence. All adolescents aren't moody. Only yours. So take a look at you. What's your ACEs score? And I can joke about that and make light about that, but the reality is we shouldn't be accepting some of this behavior as, isn't that what all kids do? No, it is not. And if you have a question, you pick up the phone, you call the school, you talk to the counselor, the nurse, the administrator, somebody, you say, hey, listen, I just had a question. Are all the kids at Pond doing this? No. Well, my kid says they are. Mindfulness, we have it, right? So there's your toolkit. Now, this is what we talked about before. The presence of a reliable, one supportive adult relationship and multiple opportunities to develop competency. In other words, if you are the problem, I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying if you find that, gee, he's talking about me. As long as there's one trusted adult in that kid's life, that can make all the difference. So what are we talking about? Sometimes it's a grandparent. Give you a prime example. When I grew up back in the 50s, right, my mom and dad had high ACEs scores. They were a mess, but they never let their stuff touch me much. But I lived in a house with my grandfather. It was my grandfather, my mom, and my dad. And I didn't even know until 5 years ago that my grandfather actually played that role for me. I'll give you an example. We used to have dinner together. My dad would come, he would eat, he would leave. He would go read the paper or watch TV. My mother would be cleaning up because back in the 50s, that's what moms did. Some of you are saying, back in the 50s, you still do that. There'd be me and my grandfather. The reason I'm not leaving is because I have lima beans on my plate. Georgie doesn't like lima beans. My mother wants me to have good nutrition. I said, Mom, I don't want to eat these. She said, you're not leaving the table until you eat your lima beans. She walks in, she walks out, she walks in, she walks out. I'm sitting, because I'm not eating those things. There's not enough milk in the world to flush those things down my throat. One time when she was out of the room, my grandfather said to me, give me your lima beans. He ate them. My mom came back in the room. She said, now, that wasn't so bad, was it? I said, nope, it wasn't so bad at all. See, my grandfather had my back. Now, somebody asked me, but didn't that avoid you holding you accountable for eating lima beans? Yeah, I guess, but he was on my side. This is a guy that was on my side. That's what your kids need. One adult, somebody. If it's not in the family, is it a teacher? Frequently it is. Is it a coach? Frequently it is. Might it be a pastor, assistant pastor in a youth group? Yep. These adults that kind of step forward, a scoutmaster, somebody who steps forward, and your kid just glands onto them because they always are glad to see your kid. It can be you, but if it's not, I hope that that kid finds somebody. Safety means this. This is what emotional safety is. We talked about each one of these, including this, avoiding shame and avoiding negative judgment and harsh language. Watch your language. It's so destructive to kids. Affirming the value. Never, ever, ever, ever giving up no matter what. We never give up on children. Ever. It can always change. And maybe the change comes from us. Maybe we begin to do things differently, and then there's a change in the family. And always believing that that change is possible. Safety again. This is from Sandra Bloom, her Sanctuary book. Healing cannot advance unless there is an environment of safety for everybody in the family, everybody in the classroom. May not be you. This is what Jesus talked about that, right? This is the adversity of reliable adult. All right, here's the final list. These are yours. Manage your own crap. I know it says baggage. I like crap better. Manage your own stuff. If you have a high ACEs score, just pay attention to it. Say, wow, really? I got a 5. Well, we're concerned about your well-being physically, but we're also concerned about what your well-being emotionally. Number 2, understand that Challenges are different than stressors. It is good for your kids to have responsibilities, in spite of what they tell you. It is good that they have chores that they are responsible for. You also don't want to run an interference for them all the time. If they get a bad grade on the test, don't be calling the school complaining about the school. Stand behind the teacher. Hold kids accountable for themselves. Let them figure it out with another adult. Let them figure the problem out. It's okay to be disappointed. It's okay for your kids to be disappointed. They'll get over it. And it'll build resiliency in them, because that's the biggest problem we're seeing today, is our children don't have enough bounce back. They get overwhelmed and shut down very quickly. They cry, I'm not doing it, this is stupid, without this resilience. And we can in fact, engineer that in the family by having our kids own some of the responsibilities of the house. Offer FaceTime. Watch your yuck face. Now, that's a research term. That's where you show disapproval right here. And your kids take one look at you and they say, what did I do? I didn't do anything. Right here. This is where you show a lot of your stuff. And when a kid lives with a bear, they're always looking for the yuck face, because what that means is they're in trouble. So we teach teachers to do the same thing. You don't always have to be smiling, but you have to be really careful about the frown. If you lose your temper, apologize right away. Yes. If you screw up and you know it's your fault, apologize for it. Here's a piece of information. Apologies have 3 pieces. 1, I want to apologize for what I did and what I said yesterday. I said blah, blah, blah. I am really sorry that I said or did that. You're really clear on what you're apologizing for. Number 2, it's my fault, it's on me. And number 3, is there anything I can do to make sure that we're going to be okay? You can't blame your bad behavior on their behavior. I yelled at you because you weren't where you should have been. Well, then it's not an apology. If you're going to apologize for your poor behavior. You know the outcome of that? They will begin apologizing for their behavior. You're not immune. Put your damn phone away. You're not immune. The rules that we want to raise our kids by are the same rules that should apply to us. Validate and normalize all of their emotions. They can feel whatever they want to feel. They just can't do whatever they want to do with it. You have a right to be angry. That happened between you and your best friend. Your girlfriend broke up with you. You are hurt and angry. You're entitled to that. You're not entitled to cut your arm because of that. You're not entitled to punch the wall, to curse at your parents, to kick the dog. You're not entitled to your behavior. You're entitled to your emotion. Strengthen attachments. Make sure your kids know. There is something in research called a 20-second hug. None of you practice 20-second hugs. I watched you. And guys, a bro hug doesn't count. The research says in order for a hug to be really meaningful, it needs to last for 20 seconds. Now, I was doing this presentation one night, and in the audience sat a superintendent, who shall go unnamed. I saw that superintendent a bit later, 2 weeks later, and he said, hey, listen, do you remember a couple weeks ago when you were presenting and you talked about a 20-second hug? I said, He said, well, I went home that night. He said, you got to understand, I have a 14-year-old daughter, Becky. When I got home, Becky was upstairs doing homework. I got in the house and said, yo, Becky, come on down here, sweetie. She said, Daddy, I'm doing homework. He said, yeah, I know, but it won't take long. Come on down. Come here. She said, Dad, can't it wait? He said, sweetie, you can't wait. Got to come down. I said, what happened? He said, well, she came down the steps. She came over to me and she said, what? I grabbed her into a bear hug. She started squirming and screaming like, this is creepy. Stop it. What are you doing? He said to her, wait, 17, 18, 19. Let her go. She looked at him like he was in case, and she went back upstairs. I said, is that the end of the story? He said, nope. 2 days later, she wanted another hug. Because our kids need to be attached. They need to know we care. One of the things that's really difficult for us in schools is we have to be really careful with touch, right? Now, at the younger level, those little guys don't care about the rules. They will come running at you and grab your leg and hug you. They'll jump in your lap because they need attachment to somebody they trust. We just have to be more careful of it as when the kids get up. But the absence of attachment is not good for human beings. Strengthen attachment. Secure the bonds between your kids and among kids in the classroom or in your own family. Let's finish up. Teach help seeking. Some reasons why our kids are in trouble is because they don't know how to seek help. Oh, in fact, some families will say, hey, listen, when you go to school, don't you be talking about what goes on here at home. This is our stuff. So they do not seek the help of an adult. We need to encourage them. When your kids get to high school or when they get to college, they need to be able to know, who are my resources? Where are they? Teach help seeking. Teach independence and self-reliance. Make it safe. And then here's the calming moment, both in the classroom and at home. So, here is your support team. If you're worried, something resonated with you tonight, say, wow, I'm not so sure, but I think maybe, or boy, am I glad tonight because I'm really worried about my son, my daughter. This is what you have. Call the school, talk to the counselor. Find a child study team member if your kid's got an IEP. A teacher, a nurse, an administrator, pastors, priests, rabbis. Get somebody that you trust to say, I need to have a conversation with you about my kid. You can no longer ignore the research. They're all human. They all need soothing and calming attention. Nothing will change if nothing changes. If you're worried about your kid, you're going to continue to worry because their behavior will not get better, likely will get worse, unless you shift something, and change it. Here are resources. This book is a resource, Childhood Disrupted. And this book is a resource called The Deepest Well. They will talk to you about things that you can be aware of that's going on with your kids and with your family. My goal was to influence your thinking. To be able to say, I got to go back and look at that video. I got to go back and look at that PowerPoint presentation. Can that really be true? Let me read a little bit more. I need to have a conversation with somebody. I want you to be uncertain where to go. I want you to be able to look at your children and say, is there something going on in the environment at home or at school that we can change so that their whole performance changes, that their mood shifts? Because I want my kids to be healthy. So thank you very much for being here.
Let's give George one more round of applause. Thank you for coming. Remember, tomorrow we will meet with 8th graders. George will speak to them for about an hour, and then we're going to go into breakout sessions. And they're going to be in small groups. They're going to meet with administrators, counselors, as well as their teachers. And we're going to talk about some of the things that George touched upon today, especially trusted adults. We know they have their parents, their family, but we're going to really work on, school resources, how to identify trusted adults. And then we're really going to work with George on self-care, so they get all of that as well as transitioning to high school. Thank you.
Thank you.